Today, I'm going to attempt to tell you the extremely convoluted, annoyingly one-sided tale of the demise of the legendary British explorer, Captain James Cook.
Okay.
And I will add that there's literally no way for me to get all the facts 100% right because no two things written about him say the same thing, and everything is tarnished by people's ideological perspectives on him and what he has accomplished.
Yeah.
See, the thing about the death of James Cook is that only the British crew who witnessed it really got to tell their story. And while we can discern some things through stories passed down on the Hawaiian Islands, and from some of the more honest record keepers on the journey, there's a lot we'll never know about exactly what happened here. What we do know is that Captain Cook got by the people of the Big Island of Hawaii, and that the fallout of that event had repercussions that shaped the fate of what for a brief time was a sovereign nation.
One thing that you're excellent at doing is sifting through varying accounts of an event and plotting a course towards what is probably the best possible guess at the truth.
That's what I attempt to do. Thank you. That's the idea. And sometimes it is very hard to parse.
Oh, I bet.
I'm going to try to get you there as best as possible. And I'm curious, do you learn much about Captain Cook in school in the UK?
Well, before you... I mean...
Go ahead.
Fuck. When you said his name, I thought, oh yeah, the Antarctic guy.
Oh. So... No, that's... what's his name?
Somebody else.
Yeah, I've read about him. I've read several books about him. And for some
Scott.
Reason, oh, yep, there you go. No, not the same guy. It's interesting because I get the sense that British schools are into Captain Cook, but maybe I'm wrong. This is only just from my Googling around about it, but that's fine. You were on the right track, as you probably do know. Captain James Cook was an 18th century English explorer. Yes. And one of much renown. He was the first European to set foot on many islands in the Pacific. In his first two voyages, he became the first European to chart the coastlines of Australia and New Zealand, paving the way for their colonization by Great Britain later on. And while obviously the legacy of colonization is bad on its face, and there's no excusing white dudes stumbling upon land masses where people lived and renaming them because those people didn't count as humans, a doctrine known as res nullius or terra nullius. From what we know, Cook was just kind of a regular entitled white explorer, not like a Christopher Columbus who pretty much the second he met the Taino people just started hacking and slashing and enslaving. For the most part, it seemed like the interactions Cook had with indigenous peoples he encountered were positive, and his crew had only good things to say about him. But on his third voyage in 1776, things changed. Now, the British Royal Archives are egregious in their justification here, saying it's possible that Cook was tired after all his travels, or maybe he was sick, and that's what caused his change of character. I don't know, Mark. When I'm tired, I get a little snippy, but I don't, burn entire villages to the ground.
I've been ill in the past. Yeah, but I've burned very little, very few. I've hardly burned a single village, really.
Yeah, but that is one of the things that poor sweepy Captain Cook did. Oh, poor little Meon. It wasn't the first time that Cook had been in Tahiti that this happened. In 1769, he arrived there with the purpose of observing the transit of Venus across the sun. In fact, 76 European expeditions were sent out to various points on the globe to do the exact same thing. Scientists theorized that charting this rare event would help to figure out the distance from the Earth to the sun, as well as extrapolate the size of the solar system. And it was a huge ass deal. And ultimately, it didn't work because telescopes were too shitty at the time to take clear readings. The idea was right, but they just weren't technologically there yet. But that didn't really matter because Cook had a separate set of secret instructions he was not to open till after the Venus thing. And those instructions had to do with sailing south in search of an unknown continent, the existence of which was postulated by Aristotle, a place called Terra Australis.
Nice. Instructions from who? Who would have written these instructions?
The the British government, the monarchy or whatever, tasked him with doing this. So Cook was to chart this new territory and, quote, to observe the genius, temper, disposition, and number of the natives, if there be any, and endeavor by all proper means to cultivate a friendship and alliance with them. You are also, with the consent of the natives, to take possession of convenient situations in the country in the name of the King of Britain. So that's the task. King sends him out to do this. And for a while, he seemed to pretty much be doing that, getting chummy with the Maori and charting the Australian coastline. But he wasn't always a stand-up guy about it. If natives weren't super into consenting to giving up their land to him, he'd, just take it. And while pretty much every history you read of Cook is like, oh, but he actually thought of the natives as people. He was a good guy. And a good chunk of them act as if he was in it for nothing but the love of science and had no idea what he was doing. He absolutely knew that he was working to expand the British Empire, and he was very much on board with that task. So on his third expedition in 1777, when he was out in search of the Northwest Passage, he found himself back in Tahiti. This time, his crewmen reported that he was prone to weird fits of rage and inexplicable decision-making. I think perhaps you can relate to.
100%.
He would fly off the handle and inflict harsh punishments on sailors for perceived offenses. He was moody and morose and seemed to have lost touch with reality. He adopted a zero-tolerance policy toward native peoples, in which the slightest pushback against him would be met with strict consequences. When, for instance, Tahitians would nick the occasional property, he would retaliate by sinking canoes and, as mentioned before, burning whole villages to the ground. He was even known to carve crosses into natives' chests for petty crimes. He became known for brutal, arbitrary violence meted out almost indiscriminately. So as the voyage carried on, they began to run low on supplies like food and water, and much to the relief of the crew, they finally came upon an island where they assumed they'd stop and see what they could stock up on. But for some reason, Cook didn't have them land. Instead, he had them just circle the island for months. Yeah. Now, by pure happenstance, the Hawaiians on shore happened to be in the midst of a ritual known as makahiki.
This was Hawaii, yeah?
This is Hawaii, yes.
Okay.
In which the god Lono is said to reappear from the distant land of his exile and to seize power over the earth from the king for a period of time. And as an effigy of Lonos was being carried around the island in a procession, Captain Cook and his ship just happened to be riding alongside it. They finally came ashore in the bay at which it was foretold Lonos would return at exactly the time that it was supposed to happen. All by chance. They had no idea. So as such, when the ship came ashore at Kealakekua Bay, the natives were like, holy fuck, there he is. It's Lonos.
Yay, he's back.
And they treated Captain Cook and his crew to 3 weeks of celebrations in which they were treated like gods and fed a barbecued pig every evening.
Literally treated like gods.
Yes. And man, if you've ever had a Kahlua pig, makes you feel like a god, that's for sure. They were loving it. So, of course, they didn't try to correct this miscommunication. They instead took advantage of the Hawaiians and their hospitality to the point where the natives started to be like, hey, these haoles are kind of assholes, right? And that hospitality began to wear off. Some sources say that everything really fell apart when one of the crewmen was killed. And at that point, the jig was up, because obviously gods can't die.
Sure.
Other sources simply say that Cook left the island on February 3rd and the Hawaiians were happy to see the back of him. But he came back. His ship was hit by a storm and was too damaged to go on without repair. So they rolled back up onto Kealakekua Bay, met by a considerably less welcoming and more suspicious populace who hurled rocks at the sailors as they came ashore. A few of the Hawaiians stole a small boat from Cook's ship, and in keeping with his zero-tolerance policy, he sent his men after them. In taking back the boat, they injured a Hawaiian alii, which is a nobleman. As a canoe was leaving the bay, Cook's men fired upon it, and they killed a lesser chief named No Okamai, and shit really hit the fan. Quote, the crowd around Cook and his men reached an estimated 20,000, And warriors, outraged by the killing of the chief, armed themselves with clubs and protective straw mat armor.
God damn.
Yeah. One bold warrior advanced on Cook and struck him with his pahoa, which is a dagger. In retaliation, Cook drew a tiny pistol, lightly loaded with shot, and fired at the warrior. His bullets spent themselves on the straw armor and fell harmlessly to the ground. The Hawaiians went wild. Lieutenant Molesworth Phillips, in charge of the 9 mariners, began a withering fire, and Cook killed 2 natives. So, seeing that there were just too many natives for them to overpower, the crew fled back to the ship. But poor sleepy Captain Cook had one problem. Motherfucker couldn't swim. So he was left standing helplessly, knee deep in the bay, as the Hawaiians came for him.
Good.
And after knocking him over the head with a club, the warriors passed around a pahoa and took turns stabbing him to death.
Have it.
Yes. Quote, following Cook's death, the captain was accorded the traditional rituals for a vanquished chief. His corpse was dismembered, his flesh roasted, and his bones separated and portioned out, with his lower jaw going to Kalani Opu'u, his skull to somebody else, and so on.
Oh, cool.
Among Cook's sailors who had fled back to the Resolution, that's the boat, a general silence ensued, wrote the officer George Gilbert. It was like a dream that we could not reconcile ourselves to. A pair of priests rowed to the ship with a bundle containing a large chunk of the captain's thigh. I'm just imagining that, like, just being on that ship, that silence, everyone just being like, fuck.
Yeah.
Bro. It is said that the Hawaiians deeply regretted that this came to pass, some of them astonished that a god could die and convinced that Cook would in fact rise from the dead and resume his place on his ship with his crewmen. A visitor in 1793 claimed that he found that they were keeping their calendar based on the death of Captain Cook on February 14th, 1779, sort of like a before and after Christ situation.
Sure, yeah.
There's probably a lot of revisionist bullshit to all of that. As Captain Cook really met his demise just because he fucked around and found out. In the wake of his death, though, natives were plagued with war, illness, and the eruption of 2 volcanoes. And it came to be seen that the death of Captain Cook had placed some sort of punishment upon them. This made the people ripe for Calvinist missionaries to swoop in and rewrite a narrative that made colonizing Hawaii easier for them. They taught that Cook was a charlatan and that he got what was coming because he had the audacity to impersonate God. The bad luck that the Hawaiians encountered wasn't because they killed Cook, but because they lived immorally with all their premarital sex and idol worship. And their worship of Cook was what led to their bad fortune, not that they had killed him.
So these accounts, where are they coming from? Because surely there can be no first-hand evidence of this.
Well, not from the Hawaiian perspective. There's first-hand evidence from the colonizers.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so there's plenty of record from the people who were on Cook's ship. You know, they wrote things down, they drew pictures, all kinds of stuff, and they brought that back.
But even that account of Cook's metal as fuck death.
Yeah, they saw it. They hadn't left. They were still there.
Okay.
They were just on the ship watching this happen. And in fact, like, there were different tellings even of how that occurred. I went through several sources that were sort of parsing like the art that was made by the people on board and stuff like that and how this was depicted. And a lot of those pictures were painted like almost heroically. Like one of the most famous paintings that had come back from it, there had been like a ship painter. And that guy came back and he drew this painting that was like, the natives are, you know, beating him, all this kind of stuff, you know, they're beating all his crew people, and it depicts Captain Cook like reaching out as if to say to the people on board, don't shoot them, don't kill the natives, like
for they know not what they do.
For they know not what they do. Again, very Jesus like, right? To make it into like, he just, you know, he understood he'd made a mistake, but don't kill them for what had come to pass, right? So there's all kinds of different tellings of this, but what I sort of found coming up, especially in the past decade or so of people talking about this stuff and uncovering other images, was that largely this is probably closer to the more accurate retelling of what actually happened. And it was
Mhm.
sad and devastating and terrifying what had
Mm.
actually happened. But of course, that wasn't really what they wanted to bring back. So yeah, there's a lot of records from people over the years of all of this stuff that had happened. But of course, all of them are tainted by what stories people wanted to tell
Of course.
about what had happened, which is why it's so hard to really develop a good sense of this narrative. But yeah, so the Calvinists convinced them, that they were being punished for their idol worship, their worshiping of Cook. And they promised redemption from the errors of their ways through mass baptism. And they then anglicized the Hawaiian language, and they translated the Bible, and they spread it. And they introduced the biblical concept of private property to the Hawaiian Islands, paving the way for huge plantations.
It is.
Yep. Run by white people who decided Hawaiians were subpar workers and thus did not employ them. They brought in cheap Japanese and Chinese labor, which is how my in-laws got there. They were there in the early 1900s working on sugarcane plantations. Yeah. So the town that I was just in, Honolulu, was a sugarcane plantation.
Incredible.
Yeah. So I won't go into the whole story of all of this, but essentially Hawaii did become a sovereign nation. And the white plantation owners were furious because they'd been enjoying tax-free commerce with the United States. So what did they do? They brought in the US Marines and overthrew the Hawaiian monarchy, a move so blatantly illegal, even the president was like, we are definitely not allowed to do that. But propaganda prevailed, convincing the American people that Queen Liliuokalani had willingly surrendered and that American control was a giant improvement over their heathen cannibal government. The Hawaiian people surely will be much happier. So Captain Cook, not in the way he intended, did in fact lead to the colonization of Hawaii.
It's incredible.
And back home, his death became a morbid curiosity. People collected paintings and paraphernalia depicting the event. A bloody ballet was staged. People got Captain Cook death-themed tattoos, and women wore dresses inspired by, quote, the Indian who killed Captain Cook. Hawaiian activist Lili Kala Kame'elehiva said the best part of Cook's visit was that we killed him. And if nothing else, at least we can delight in that his death was brutal, pathetic, and paraded around his home country as a curiosity.
Yeah, well, that's something, isn't it?
That is the one thing that we can say.
Incredible.
For all of that.
So it makes me wonder, right? So in order for Captain Cook to be mistaken for the kind of living manifestation of a god, all he did was kind of turn up at a coincidental juncture while they were
astounding coincidence.
What would it take today for us to believe that a being was the second coming of God?
I was thinking about
an
this.
Incarnation of God. What would have to happen?
It's not that hard though, because it happens all the time, doesn't it? If you think about like cult leaders, like a David Koresh or something like that, he convinced all those people that he was a reincarnation of Jesus. Or even on like a smaller level, when people think that they see God in a piece of toast,
yeah.
People are very easily convinced of this stuff. This is not like
church. Does the church have like a set of criteria or a set of qualifiers that have to happen for them to believe that the resurrection has occurred?
Well, it can't. I mean, the resurrection already happened,
right?
As far as the church is concerned, it can't happen again. So, in a Christian church that is not like a cult, a new religion, an offshoot like that, there is no way that that's going to happen. There can be no third coming of Jesus.
Is that not what the church is kind of waiting for and banking on?
Well, no, the rapture is like a different thing, or the like return of Christ to earth or whatever. And that does have, depending on your specific beliefs or whatever, things that are heralded in the book of Revelation that will happen.
Yeah.
When Christ comes back and establishes his kingdom.
Yes.
But it doesn't happen like it's not a reincarnation of Jesus. He won't walk amongst us and be like a
Oh, okay,
No,
okay, okay. I
human.
was under the
Yeah.
impression that that was something that everyone was kind of any day now. It's coming.
No, for a lot of evangelicals, once that day comes, they'll go zoop, and end up in heaven
I
before
see.
they bear any of
Okay.
that. And then a whole bunch of terrible stuff happens to
Yeah.
everyone who's left here.
Well, as we're going to chat about later on, the terrible stuff is happening fucking anyway.
It's already here. TBH. So there is that. But it's funny that you asked that question, because that was a thing I was thinking. It's very easy to go like, oh, those Hawaiians and their superstitions, thinking they were gods or whatever. But people are tricked into that all the time. All the time. Lots of white folks falling for that every day in America. So yeah.
I've always been under the impression, mistakenly it would seem, that we spoke about miracles a couple of weeks back. I've always been under the impression that was the whole thing with the church, be it Catholic or Christian or whatever. They're waiting for, any day now he's going to come back again.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
that isn't to say like in physical.
It's Jesus riding on a white horse. It's the coming in, not as like he won't be born a man, walk amongst us, reveal himself as a human the way that he did. In the Bible, it'll be more of a triumphant return and like a fuck yeah, Jesus is here.